Hello? Oh, that works. Right, okay. I'm going to sit down and I'll talk to you sitting down. Welcome to this evening, which hopefully will be an extremely interesting evening. And yep, so well done to Steve for thinking about it. There's only one notice I need to give you, and that's if you need the loos, you need to go out through that door and go to the minister's vestry toilet.
We've left the door open with a light on.
Okay.
If anybody needs the disabled toilet, either myself or Sue have been appointed to open the doors and take people, and we'll go up the ramp, etc. So
Okay.
it is possible.
Okay. Can she what? Oh, if you need to go to a disabled toilet, then I think you said Sue or Pearl will show you the way to go, so to speak. And apart from that, I don't think there are any notices, but shall we start the evening with just a word of prayer? Thank you, Lord, for being with us tonight. And Lord, we pray that you'll be with Steve as well as he talks to us. And we pray that it will be a lovely evening. Thank you, Lord. Amen. So, over to Steve.
First thing to do, change glasses. Thank you, Helen. Good evening, and thank you for subjecting yourself to this talk about Anglican Cathedrals of England. It's been a long time coming, but we're here finally. Helen originally alluded to this as Sue and Steve's Cathedrals tour. While it's true that Sue has endured the endless weekends and short breaks away, it's a hard life. She's seen 36 of our cathedrals, very impressive. Other trips I've also shared with other family and friends. All the same, I feel this talk should be entitled Anglican Cathedrals, this time it's personal. And it's personal because this talk, if I manage to get through it, is the 69th item on my 70 things to do before I'm 70. So, settle down, relax and enjoy as I conduct a whistle-stop tour, and it probably will be a whistle-stop tour, of some of the most spectacular buildings in England. So the way this is going to operate is this evening will be split into two halves. The first part will be about the Anglican cathedrals generally, and there'll be a brief 15-minute interval, comfort and refreshment break, and then we'll start the second part, focusing a little bit more on 4 cathedrals. However, I promise that you will see at least 1 image, 2, maybe 3, possibly 4, of all of the 42 cathedrals that we have in the official 42 cathedrals Anglican in England. There may be 1 extra. This comes with a bonus cathedral. So, setting the scene. How did I get started on this epic journey? Well, before I retired, I'd already decided upon my first retirement project, which was to visit every English Anglican cathedral. Some I'd already visited over many years, from boy and young man to not so young man, because these buildings are much too important to not visit when the opportunity arises. But this project was to start from scratch, a clean slate as it were. It's taken me over 3 years to complete. Well, there are 42 of them, 43 if you include Westminster Abbey, the Royal Peculiar. And in doing so, I've travelled to places that I perhaps wouldn't normally have chosen to go to. I've become more familiar with how cathedrals are designed, orientated, how they feel, and definitely how they sound. Just like people, they're all individual, They all have their own personalities, their own histories, peculiarities. Remember, when you visit a cathedral, you're seeing it in a brief moment in time. So much has happened in the years since each cathedral was built, and so much more will happen in the future. Shouldn't be that one. I'll go back. Something to ponder as throughout the evening. I don't need an answer. How is it possible for buildings to move you spiritually and emotionally? Just think about that. If you want to talk to me about that at the break, that's fine. Cathedrals are designed, among other things, to impress. They range from small to enormous, dark and brooding to light and airy, young to very old. They are, to me, a vital part of our country and our communities. They have been bombed, raided, defaced, altered, vandalised, but they've also been rebuilt, repaired, renovated, rejuvenated, restored, and revered. They are loved and admired by locals and foreigners alike. They are living and breathing organisms throughout our country and our culture. They provide for our communities and for our individuals, offering hope, help, comfort, shelter, refreshment, prayer, and healing. They also, somewhat surprisingly, offer entertainment in the form of performances of comedy shows, music recitals, and even rock concerts. They frequently host touring exhibitions, craft markets, degree ceremonies, honorary awards presentations, as well as daily services, weddings, baptisms, and funerals. So with all that in mind, our cathedrals are anything but uninteresting and uninspiring. Tonight, I hope I can provide you with a teasing taste, a mouth-watering morsel, a tantalising tidbit of information about our great English Anglican cathedrals. This will not be a complete history lesson, although inevitably there will be an element of that. Neither will it be the complete story of each cathedral. We could be here for days. All the photographs you will see, with a few exceptions, are taken by myself or Sue. They're not professional, and they are all taken with little or no post-processing. We'll also hear from Sue about things that have left an impression on her on a couple of the cathedrals. There will be facts and figures, reflections and anecdotes, to the best of my memory. It's also important to stress that I'm not an expert on any of these cathedrals. A couple of quotations. Can you all read the wording on the screens? Right. Now, I feel that the middle part of this first quotation relates to me and my experiences. Other than one or two particular cathedrals, I feel I'm not well acquainted with many of these buildings. It will come as no surprise to my family that I will want to keep on meeting up with these acquaintances until we become friends. If you have questions, I'd ask that you wait until the break. I can't promise I'll have a ready answer, but I will endeavour to get an answer to you as soon as I can. There also may be one or two people with us tonight who can answer some of your questions. Over a cuppa, of course. And so it was on the 9th of August 2021 I began my adventure by visiting York Minster. What a start. I didn't know what to expect or how I would feel at the end of this journey. It was clear to me after I had completed my visits that I'd experienced something remarkable and wonderful. So, let's have a bit of fun. 5 points for each correct answer. Keep your own score. No cheating. Easy one first. Which cathedral has the tallest spire? Salisbury is the answer. 123 metres from floor to top of spire. That's 404 feet in old money. Also, it's situated in the largest cathedral close in the UK, around about 80 acres. And it's possibly the most rural, in that it's surrounded on three sides by countryside. Salisbury Cathedral has been without a permanent font for over 200 years. This exquisite installation, added in September 2008, expresses the never-ending, life-giving qualities of water. I'm hoping you can see from the photograph on the right, the font designed by William Pye is three-cornered, I suppose representing the Trinity, but the water on top of the font is a totally still effect of water and reflects everything around you. And it pours out from each of those points into gullies and grates and is then recycled. But it is just so beautiful. Which cathedral has the shortest tower? Any guesses? It is... sorry, I've got to look at my notes now. Shortest out, Christchurch, Oxford. Sorry, the slide on the right should have given it away. Christchurch in Oxford, the university attended by both Wesley brothers. Which is the shortest cathedral? We're talking about English cathedrals. That's in Welsh. That's in Welsh Wales. Any guesses? No? It is Carlisle. Which cathedral, I'm sure you'll know this one, which cathedral has the longest nave? I'm expecting answers from over there. Well, the answer is Winchester. The nave at Winchester, just the nave at Winchester, is 169 metres long, 554 feet if you speak both languages. The view is also enhanced. So this is that's the view of the nave up close to the crossing. A couple more images there. The view of looking down east within the nave is also enhanced by being able to see over the top of that screen right the way down through into the presbytery. Which cathedral, you may have already guessed this next one, which cathedral has the shortest nave? No. It is Carlisle. In fact, it's regarded as having no nave at all. The nave was partly demolished by the Scottish Presbyterian Army, during the English Civil War to help rebuild Carlisle Castle. Which is the oldest cathedral? And I would have guessed another fairly easy one.
Canterbury.
It is Canterbury, yes. Founded in 597, but completely rebuilt between 1070 and 1077. Much more about Canterbury later. Which of the recent ones, I'll give you these clues. I've put the two together because I don't want to be unkind to one or the other. So the one on the left is Guildford Cathedral. Guildford was started in the 1930s, but finished in the early 1960s. And the cathedral on the right is Coventry. The foundation stone laid in 1956 and consecrated in 1962. Much more about Coventry later. Which cathedral is the furthest north? The answer is Newcastle. And let's go round the compass points. Which is the furthest south? Truro, correct. Which cathedral is the furthest east? Correct. Norwich with its beautiful spire and more scaffolding, as you can see on the right-hand side. Amazing amount of scaffolding around cathedrals. And which cathedral is the furthest west? Truro. It is. Which cathedral, I may be up for challenge on this. The information I read is which cathedral took the longest to build? Well, the information I was reading is York Minster. It began in 1220 and it was finished 272 years later. So there we are. Your host for tonight stood on the 50th step. There are 275 steps up to the top of the tower. Which cathedral was the quickest to build? Coventry, correct. Taking just 6 years. Now, I'd be interested if you know this one. Which two cathedrals have 3 spires? And? Correct. Well done. Lichfield and Truro. And a bonus point, points even, make your mind up. Do you know what the name of the 3 spires are at Lichfield Cathedral? Ladies of the Vale. Which cathedral is largest by floor area? Correct, Liverpool Cathedral, which weighs in at 9,687 square metres, approximately 10 times as big as our church here. Which is the smallest? Now, I've been kind again because I've put 4 of these together, bless them. So we'll work through them. This is Christ Church in Oxford. The present size, 1,525 square metres, and it's recently had a new stained glass window installed, the first for 130 years. Designed by John Raintians, it reminds us of our responsibilities to care for creation. Christ Church is an exquisite cathedral. Very compact, but beautiful details around every corner. And the next one is, that's Birmingham Cathedral. That's at 1,274 square metres, followed by, any guesses? Chelmsford, yes, at 1,047 square metres, quite a small cathedral. And the smallest, of course, is Derby, yes, 1,017 square metres. So, do you think the total floor area of Trinity, and I'm including the rooms at the back, is more or less than Derby? Well, this church is smaller. Trinity is about 40 square metres smaller than Derby Cathedral. Recent visitor figures, can you see that? Recent visitor figures indicate that 9.4 million people visited cathedrals in the UK in 2023, which approximates to 223,809.5 people per cathedral per year. Calculators don't lie. So, coming in third place is Salisbury. In second place, do we have any guesses? It's Wells. And what would be the first place cathedral? St. Paul's, correct. So the Church of England is divided into 2 provinces. We have a northern province and a southern province. The northern province is governed by the Archbishop of York, the southern province by the Archbishop of Canterbury. There are officially 42 English Anglican cathedrals, each representing the various dioceses in England. Each diocese represents an administrative area. Each cathedral is the official place of a bishop. We get the word cathedral from the Latin word cathedra, meaning seat of a bishop. And the lucky old Bishop of Leeds, the Right Reverend Nick Baines, now has 3 cathedrals in his diocese because the boundaries of the diocese recently changed. So he has, along with 1 or 2 of his helpers, Ripon, Bradford and Wakefield. However, my project has also included Westminster Abbey, which is officially designated as a royal peculiar, meaning that the senior cleric at Westminster Abbey is always appointed by the Crown. As far as I can ascertain, the Reverend Mark Birch has been appointed by King Charles III as Dean of Westminster Abbey. An extra 5 points if you know the answer to this question. What is the collective noun for a group of bishops? Any guesses? The answer is a bench. It's a bit disappointing, really, isn't it, when you get to that? Cathedrals are generically split into various parts or areas. I realise I may be teaching some people here to suck eggs, but nevertheless, we'll get through this. This image broadly describes each part of the cathedral. Cathedrals, as you may know, are orientated on a west to east axis. Theologically, this axis reinforces the text found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 27, when Jesus says, "For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." However, there are 2 cathedrals in England where the axis is along generally a north-south line. Any guesses? Coventry and Liverpool. So, in very early cathedrals, we have a space called a narthex, which is always at the west end. A narthex is the Greek word for giant fennel. And I'm reinforcing giant fennel, which means it's a long tunnel space running north to south, and these were used to accommodate those who were not allowed into the main body of the cathedral. I double-checked the translation, and I'm assured it is giant fennel, and not giant funnel, which would also fit the purpose of such a space. These days, the narthex is often a lobby, which practically acts to regulate access through the west door and reduce drafts. In most cathedrals, but not all, the west door is used as their axis, their entrance. The nave follows follows on from west to east and terminates at the crossing. So on either side of the nave, you have a north aisle and a south aisle, and that will become a little bit more clear later on. So they also have a north transept and a south transept, and again there is a little bit more information about those things a little later. So this is the crossing where the nave terminates. Continuing, and I should say that in Lincoln, Salisbury, Wells and Canterbury, they all have a double transept. So not only do they have the one line going north to south, they have 2. Continuing east from the crossing is the chancel, where we have the altar. This area in the chancel is often spelt choir, Q-U-I-R-E, as the space for the choir. The east end is completed by a sanctuary or presbytery, where the high altar is located, usually below a very elaborate screen called a reredos. Often, but not always, you would have an ambulatory or an apse which runs behind the sanctuary and essentially joins together the north and the south aisles. In some cathedrals, there are a number of side chapels which are located along north and or south aisles and around the apse end, and these are usually set aside for quiet prayer meditation. Sometimes, again not always, and there are fewer of these around these days, you will find a chapter house off to one side and a cloister if one still exists. So it's important to know, and I'm sure that many of you will, that very early cathedrals, which existed before Henry VIII's spat with the Pope, were always Roman Catholic churches. Some began life as monasteries. It was usually the case that the first part of a cathedral to be built was the sanctuary, where the monks and other members of the clergy would work and worship. Historically, the general public would not be allowed into the sanctuary and were only allowed admittance to the nave area. For this reason, there was always a screen, a rood screen or pulpitum, to separate the monks from the general public. Initially, these were usually formed from stone, pre-medieval times. In later years, we see finely carved timber screens, and then later we will have beautifully woven wrought iron. So we see a typical example there in St Albans. That's a stone pulpitum. Worcester has a timber screen, Lichfield the wrought iron. The word rood is derived from the Anglo-Saxon word for cross. Sue and I were visiting Salisbury Cathedral, and we were having a guided tour, as was our wont at the time. We were stood in the choir area, and the guide asked us if we knew where the saying hocus pocus comes from. He went on to explain that in cathedrals with a stone pulpitum, the congregation would only be able to hear what was being said or sung by the priest or choir. So as the priest reaches the point during sacrament in the Catholic Mass where he says, hoc est corpus meum, which is Latin for this is my body, as the sound echoed around the huge building, the people heard hocus pocus. 39 of our 42 cathedrals are Grade 1 listed by Historic England. There are 3 that are not. Blackburn on the left, Guildford in the middle, and Leicester on the right. But these are listed as Grade 2 star buildings. Durham, Canterbury and Westminster Abbey are also World Heritage Sites. One of the delights about walking around cathedrals is to notice peculiarities and oddities in timber and stone carvings. Some of these curiosities is generally attributed to the stonemasons who originally built these places. Now, stonemasons were paid on a piecemeal basis and would therefore leave their individual signature to indicate how much work they'd done for that work that day or that week or whatever. In other instances, stonemasons would leave their mark, as it were, by carving stone caricatures of the incumbent clerics and incorporating them into the decorations, often as grotesques. The dictionary definition of grotesque in this context is a very ugly or comically distorted figure or image. In today's world, we seem to hear the phrases, the highest tower in the world, or the most expensive painting ever sold, or even the best concert ever performed. Well, such superlatives are not just limited to the 21st century. Just as humanity strives for perfection these days to stand out from the crowd and be noticed, this desire was very much evident in the early days of cathedral building. Let's not forget, that's around 1,000 years ago. One must bear in mind that from around that time, this country was starting to witness the explosion of Christianity, as evidenced by a huge program of cathedral building. As time moved on and building techniques improved, The size and scale of these unfamiliar structures was alien to anyone who had never travelled throughout Europe, which was probably most of our population. When compared to a largely domestic scale of building, these structures were immense, with soaring vaulted ceilings and roofs, intricately carved stonework and decoration, and of course, beautiful music. I feel a tangible change take place whenever I enter these enclosed spaces. I imagine those early pilgrims, visitors, or merely the curious sensed a feeling of mystery and otherworldliness when stood inside these places of wonder. Such magnificent examples of graceful architecture and incredible feats of engineering were likely to have been considered as futuristic to them as we perhaps consider AI is to us. Now, at the beginning, I promised you would see images of all of the cathedrals. So before we have a break, I'll guide you, hopefully quickly, through a few more cathedrals, possibly with some anecdotes along the way. So here we go. The top left, that's Bradford Cathedral. That became a cathedral. It used to be a parish church, became a cathedral in 1919. If you know the answer to any of these, please shout out. I'd be delighted to know if you know them. Chester Cathedral, which I believe is the one in the middle at the top, was, at that time we visited, was hosting a model railway exhibition. You'd be interested in that, Peter? Of course, courtesy of Pete Waterman. On a subsequent visit, we also saw a sculpture display of Christ formed entirely out of wire coat hangers. Exeter Cathedral. An unusual cathedral. Oh, I need to move on now. So that was Chester, the top three, yeah, and then I'll move on a little bit further. So, Exeter Cathedral is the top left. It's unusual in that the north and south towers are not located at the west end, as they are on every other cathedral, which that is a unique feature of Exeter Cathedral. Now, perhaps Sue wants to come up and explain a little bit about the video that we're just about to see. Hopefully we will be able to see it on the screen. Do I have to press the next one? Right, so this is it.
So while Steve was looking at all of the architecture, I tended to be looking at the internal design and fashions and stuff. And I took this video of the cushions that were around Exeter Cathedral. It went the whole way up one side, the whole way down the other side. And it fascinated me. It's been designed by the Friends of the Cathedral. It took about 5 years for the women to crochet, I presume, to embroider these cushions. And they went round all of the pillars. And on the front of them, you've got the ledge part of it. It represents the things that were going on in the country. So the kings that were in it, their timelines. So the kings that were in, or the queens that were in any one time, and behind that date of that particular king, the next little bit were things that were happening in the world. So they were embroidered, and there were pictures, and there were writings. I think one of it said Black Plague, for instance. So that would relate. So the front of it was one bit, the next bit was what was going on in the country, and the bit behind that was specific to the cathedral. So to Exeter Cathedral, the vicars or the bishops that were in place at that time. So there were 3 simultaneous timelines going on, and it went from one end, bottom left, all the way up, round the pillars, carried on, and it was just one continuous piece, and then it came back the other side, and it just absolutely fascinated me. So those are sort of things I was noticing now. Steve's looking at caricatures and things.
So then we have Gloucester on the right. You might be up again in a minute. So the next one, of course, there we have Lincoln Cathedral, which at one point, and I didn't know this until fairly recently, Well, I knew it before I visited, obviously. At one point, it was the highest building in the world, but taller than the pyramids. And for those who are familiar with the geography around that area, you can understand how exhausted you are by the time you've got to the west door, because it is up a very, very steep hill. Well, they're towers. Oh, it used to have, doesn't anymore. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, thank you. Where are we? So, Hereford Cathedral on the left. Oops. Go back one. So, Manchester Cathedral. I'm going to forget the name of the singer who was in concert in Manchester when they had the bomb attack. Ariana Grande. So at the back of, at the east end of Manchester Cathedral, there is a beautiful garden, a garden of remembrance with every name of those people who died in the bomb attack. It's gorgeous. The cathedral on the right is Peterborough Cathedral, the last cathedral I visited. And I have to say, before I visited it, I was wanting it to be another cathedral. I wanted to end on another cathedral because I wasn't aware really an awful lot about Peterborough Cathedral, but as soon as I got there, wow, it's good. And even the teddy bears know how to play the piano. Right, where are we? Say again? You can? Tribute to the carpenters then. Sue's presence will be required now. So Portsmouth Cathedral, that was visited on a visit that myself and Joanna and Naomi were doing down to the Isle of Wight. So of course you have to call in Portsmouth on the way. So Ripon Cathedral, again, a very beautiful cathedral, compact and sort of embedded into the city centre. So Sue's going to talk a little bit about one of those slides.
So when we went to Ripon, kind of off the cuff really, we walked in and there was a wedding dress exhibition on, and it was representing 100 years. I can't quite remember the point of the 100 years, but it was 100 years that they were celebrating. It was their centenary. There's a lot of things going on. And they had a wedding dress exhibition, and it had pretty much every year covered by a wedding dress of that time. So it was roughly 100 dresses, including one from St Michael's and All Angels, Tettenhall, the wedding that was there. And the dress was there. I'm not sure if that's the actual dress or not, but it is. So that is the dress. So that somebody got married, and if I remember rightly, it was 1961. So that wedding dress there was actually local.
So here we have Rochester Cathedral. That was a nice Christmas market at Rochester. And on the right is Sheffield Cathedral, formerly the Church of St Peter and St Paul. And it gained its cathedral status in, Sheffield, in 1914. So next we have Southwark Cathedral on the Thames, the south bank of the Thames, which sits cheek by jowl with the bustling borough market. To see those two places next to each other is just amazing. And there's even a statue of our bard sat in the outside on a bench. The cathedral on the right, Southwell Minster, is famous for the sculpture, the carvings of the leaves and flowers in stone. They are exquisite. So three-dimensional. How a stonemason can carve up behind and inside a piece of stone, which he then forms into a glorious leaf. It's just unbelievable. Another one to go to. Well, no, go to all of them. Where are we? St Edmundsbury Cathedral. There was a Lego model of the cathedral on display in the sort of west part of the cathedral, the southwest part, where you could sponsor a brick and you could help to build a model of St Edmundsbury. It had almost been finished by the time I got there. And then on the right is Wakefield Cathedral, again, gained cathedral status in 1888. Among other things, it has a peregrine falcon nesting in the top of the tower. Our past history is not just important, I'd say it's vital. We all have a connection with what has gone before us, but what I believe we must do is go forward in the knowledge of what we have learned from the past. Over the centuries, cathedrals have changed and adapted to the needs, dare I say, fashions of the time. And that's absolutely right. Cathedrals continue to change and adapt. It may be a slow process, but it's inevitable. In the 18th century, Wolfgang von Goethe once described architecture as frozen music. Well, I feel I need to take issue with Goethe on this point. For me, there is something about walking around a cathedral, noticing how the sunlight dances across the stonework and timber carvings, experiencing the differences of each space that positively rings with music. And that's even before the organ starts to play. The architecture that I see is rather more like the image on the right. There's a flow, a rhythm, a dance to cathedral architecture that is far from frozen. So before we take a 15-minute break, a couple of quotations that I found quite interesting. This is from Ken Follett on his book, or talking rather about his book, Pillars of the Earth. He said he went to look at one of these great cathedrals one day and was blown away by it. From there, I became interested in how cathedrals were built, and from there I became interested in the society that built the medieval cathedral. It occurred to me at some point that the story of the building of a cathedral could be a great popular novel. Well, it seems to be, because his book sold over 175 million copies. And a good read as well. I never weary of great churches. It's my favourite kind of mountain scenery. Mankind was never so happily inspired as when it made a cathedral. Time for a comfort break. There are books and other little things to look at, to browse through on the rail here, including, and I've just been handed something like this to me tonight, that Marion is doing a word search puzzle on cathedrals. So again, have a look at that one while you're over there. We'll be back in about 15 minutes. I hope during the time you'll find time to listen to music that's been provided by Gary. Thank you very much, Gary. This is contemporary choral music, which you would find and listen to in cathedrals. Here we go. Let's listen to the music and help ourselves to tea, coffee, biscuits, and cake. Welcome back. Have we lost anyone? I must be doing something that's interesting then, right? So in this part, as I said earlier, I'd like to focus in a little more detail. Don't expect masses of detail. A little bit more detail on 4 cathedrals. 2 of them are on my personal favourites list. One is the oldest, one is the youngest, and we already know what 2 of those are. Let's start with Canterbury. Visited on the 3rd of December 2022. Canterbury is called the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of Christ in Canterbury. That's its full title. Bishop, Archbishop of Canterbury, of course, role currently vacant. The Dean is perhaps I ought to explain at the start, all of these, this information about people's names was all distilled from the internet, so I'm hoping that these are still incumbent. So the Dean is the Very Reverend Dr. David Monteith. This is where it all began, the HQ of the Anglican Church, set in its own close. And from the moment Sue and I entered through the shop and into the cathedral close, we both felt a tangible feeling of peace, in part due to the separation of the cathedral from the main town area. So how did it all begin? In the year 597, a monk named Augustine was sent to England by Pope Gregory II to lead a missionary force to convert people to Christianity and to establish a cathedral. Among his first converts to Christianity was the Anglo-Saxon King of Kent, King Ethelbert. The earliest cathedral in Canterbury was most likely an existing church, which was rehallowed by Augustine in 602. In 1067, this old cathedral was completely ruined by fire, which raged through the city. In 1070, Lanfranc, the first of a series of Norman bishops, was consecrated at Canterbury, where the ceremony was held in a makeshift shelter close to the Saxon cathedral ruins. Bishop Lanfranc took on board a complete reorganisation of the monastery and began to build a new cathedral. Now, this amused me. In monasteries, all the monks have jobs. It's not just a case of turning up and praying all day. For those not versed in the life of a monk, and including me, let me enlighten you just a little. The early monastic buildings had quite a number of staff who took on particular jobs. For example, it was the chamberlain's job to look after clothing, laundry, and sleeping arrangements. He would also ensure that the monks regularly washed and shaved, and that every 3 weeks their tonsures were shaved. That's this bit here. Saturday nights were set aside for foot baths. Now, I imagine in those days that was probably quite a regular occurrence, and probably more regular than most of the population, I'm guessing. I might be wrong. The main surge in building activity took place during the 14th century. The early Romanesque nave was demolished, and a new nave, that's the new nave, the current nave, was built, introducing an early perpendicular Gothic style. It was built over a period of 28 years and reached completion in 1405. So we see it has a very vertical emphasis. Above is the astonishing fan vaulting below the impressive Bell Harry Tower. And that tower is a long way up. As with St Albans in Liverpool, the cathedral is set at different levels. Now, to me, this symbolises the spiritual journey towards God. Now, I remember I had mentioned earlier about Canterbury having a double transept. So the floor plan, when we finish looking at the interiors, it's a beautiful church. So this is the floor plan of the cathedral. So the double transept are there and there. So in the diagram that you saw at the start, you had the nave with the side, the north and the south aisles, which completed at the crossing, which would be the bit of purple there on the left. But those cathedrals earlier, they have a double transept, which is the one on the other side of the choir area. The choir and presbytery are built over the top of the original crypt, and the crypt also extends part way underneath the nave, making it the largest crypt in England, if not Europe. The first flight of steps up from the nave passes through the gloriously elaborate pulpitum screen and into the choir. This part was begun by William of Sens, French stonemason. That is, until he fell from scaffolding and seriously injured himself. The work was then completed by another master craftsman, William the Englishman. Clearly you had to be a William if you wanted to be a stonemason. Canterbury has a very large choir area with a raised part at the eastern end, this being the Trinity Chapel and High Altar, behind which is the shrine of Thomas Becket. There's no surprise that a lot was made of the murder of Sir Thomas Becket, and it would be remiss of me not to mention the circumstances leading up to Becket's murder. This, after all, is the cathedral's most famous and astonishing story. Towards the end, the details are a bit gory, spoiler alert. But if you take the tour, you'll get the same information anyway. In summary, Becket was born in 1118. He was well educated and had a thorough knowledge of Latin. As a younger man, he travelled around the famous schools of Europe. He took a vow of chastity in Paris, returning to England in 1140, so he'd be 22, where he joined the staff at Canterbury Cathedral. He was elevated to archdeacon in his early 20s. He was also recommended to King Henry II to be Chancellor of the realm. This is the truly astonishing part for me. In 1162, he was consecrated as bishop and then enthroned as Archbishop of Canterbury, all within 2 days. In October 1164, when he was around 45 years old, Thomas fled to France. Relationships had broken down between himself and King Henry II. He was in France in exile for 6 years. He returned to Canterbury in 1170 to resume his role as Archbishop. However, in his first sermon, it was clear that he was still unwilling to compromise with the things King Richard was expressing. The king was reported as saying, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" Well, 4 of the king's knights eventually took it upon themselves to pay a murderous visit to Thomas. They met with Thomas in the bishop's palace, where angry scenes ensued. Thomas fled into the cathedral, followed by some monks and the 4 knights. At Thomas's insistence, the door was left open. The monks hurried Thomas off to the northwest transept, followed by the knights. Thomas stood firm to face his assailants, whereupon one of them shouted, "Strike! Strike!" swung his sword and hit Thomas on his head, whereupon Thomas fell to the floor. Prepare yourselves. A final blow was seen to cut off the top of Thomas's head. I did warn you. An altar, an earlier one than this one on the left, aptly named Sword's Point, was set up, which attracted thousands of people. You will note that the current wall sculpture symbolises, and I think quite graphic detail, the horror of Becket's murder. It was witnessed that 2 days after he was murdered, miracles began to happen. thereby warranting Thomas's canonization. A series of beautiful stained glass windows in Trinity Chapel depict scenes of these miracles. Canterbury was regarded as being more fortunate than most other churches and seemed to largely avoid early 16th century attacks before and during the Civil War. Due to this, a significant amount of original medieval stained glass survives, which has subsequently been cleaned and restored. Today, Canterbury stands as a magnificent place of worship and a place full of intrigue, humour, and great beauty. From the oldest to the youngest, Coventry Cathedral was visited on the 20th of November 21. On our second attempt to try and visit it, the first attempt it was closed because there was a university graduation. So we came back the next day. It's called the Cathedral Church of St. Michael. The Bishop, the Right Reverend Sophie Jelly, Dean, the Very Reverend John Whitcomb. Coventry has had 3 cathedrals. Lucky Coventry. The first, a monastic building built in 1102 and mostly destroyed in 1539 when Henry VIII was in the process of dissolving the monasteries. Today very little remains of this first cathedral, but for the next 379 years Coventry was without a cathedral at all. The second cathedral, the one all but totally destroyed by the Luftwaffe on the night of 14th November 1940, remains closely linked with the current cathedral building. And the current cathedral is built immediately next to the old cathedral. The architect Sir Basil Spence had won the competition with his radical departure from the Gothic style of the ruined cathedral. The overall plan form also differs largely from what we might expect to see in a cathedral. Spence recalled that when the plans for the new steel and concrete cathedral were revealed in the press, he received hundreds of letters the next morning. 80% were rude. The remaining 20% were very rude. This third cathedral was designed from the beginning to be a place not simply for Church of England purposes, but to be a focus for all peoples from all denominations and all faiths. In a 1974 interview, he recalls that the project took up 10 years of his life, and when it was finished, it left a terrible vacuum. As mentioned earlier, the cathedral, along with Liverpool Cathedral, is orientated on roughly a north-south axis. Spence was adamant that the shell of the old cathedral, orientated west to east, should be retained and that the new cathedral be linked physically and spiritually to the old building. I first learned of this cathedral when I was a student in Preston. My tutor at the time was an architect who was passionate about innovation in new buildings. It was he who told me about the stained glass windows, where the circles are now showing, along each side of the nave, designed by Lawrence Lee, Keith New and Geoffrey Clark. These windows are angled in such a way that they can't be seen when facing forward. The stunning effect comes when turning around, especially after receiving communion, where the brilliance and explosion of colour is a powerful reminder of the magnificence of the light of Christ. The huge tapestry, there we go, which is located there, allegedly the largest in the world, is called Christ in Glory. Designed by Graham Sutherland, it hangs behind the high altar on the geographical south wall. The large expanse of glass along the north facade is essentially hung from the roof, and it's designed by New Zealand artist John Hutton and depicts angels and saints etched into the glass. The baptistry window, or windows, are a glorious reimagining of medieval stained glass. Whilst medieval cathedrals took decades or even centuries to build, the new cathedral took just 6 years. The metal spire, you can just about see that very faintly, it's the very thin line on top of the building on the left. So the medieval spire, not the medieval spire, the current spire, was actually flown in by an RAF helicopter, and according to news footage, was installed in minutes. The spire, approximately 90 metres from ground to the tip, is the third tallest spire in England, and it's commonly called a flèche, which is a French word for, do you know that? Arrow. I was particularly struck by the Chapel of Christ in Gethsemane. When you look through and beyond the stark metal crown of thorns, you see Christ in heavenly glory. The choir stalls, designed by Sir Basil Spence, represent crowns of thorns, together with the eagle lectern, one in the middle. That was by Elizabeth Frink, adds more striking contemporary elements. Advance notice, date for your diary. 11th of October, there will be people from our church singing in Coventry Cathedral with a number of other churches from around the country, and we will be presenting a service in the cathedral. Let me see you writing it down in your diaries. My personal favourite. The Cathedral Church of St Andrew. Bishop the Right Reverend Michael Beasley, Dean the Very Reverend Toby Wright. The history of Wells Cathedral starts with water. Wells, water, that's about right. It was discovered emerging from the ground in what is now the Bishop's Garden, adjacent to the cathedral. The cathedral has had quite a checkered past. It's thought that there was a very early church in Wells from around about 766. The building grew and was given cathedral status in 909, and is thought to have survived the ravages of the Norman conquest, due perhaps to the bishop of the time being a supporter of William the Conqueror. However, almost 200 years later, Bishop John de Villula from Tours in France moved his cathedra, his see, his bishop's seat, from Wells to the Abbey at Bath, some 19 miles northeast of Wells, meaning that the church here was no longer a cathedral. The current building in Wells was built entirely in the Gothic style. It was begun in 1175, starting with the Lady Chapel, which allowed services to continue while the rest of the building was constructed. This was apparently a stop-start process due to lack of funding and/or building materials. Bishops came and bishops went, and finally around 1219, the Bishop Jocelyn applied to the Pope for Wells to be granted cathedral status. The Pope eventually granted this status, some 25 years later. Sadly, 2 years after Jocelyn had died. The constant interruptions in construction work continued, but eventually the whole building was completed in 1508. At this point, both Wells and Bath had co-cathedral status. When Henry VIII dissolved the abbey at Bath, cathedral status was then placed firmly and solely on Wells. One of the major Gothic masterpieces of this cathedral is the majestic west front. It was begun in 1215 and on its completion boasted the largest collection of figurative statues in the Western world at that time. The cathedral guidebook identifies that there were approximately 380 life-size statues. It is a perfectly proportioned facade, faced almost entirely with the beautiful honey yellow colour of Dilting stone. Originally, this facade would have been painted with vibrant colours of reds, greens, whites and golds. And some of the figures would have had gilded metal staffs, adding additional highlights of sparkle as the sunlight picked out these features. Towards the top, as you'll see in the top right-hand photograph, that's the central section. Below a row of apostles, there are 8 holes which connect with the singing gallery behind. If I had a pointer, well, you can see those 8 holes anyway. These holes were used by trumpeters who would sound fanfares during religious processions. That would be outside the church. Lower down the centre section of the facade, there are a further 4 holes through which the choir boys would sing, giving the impression of angel voices combining with the trumpet sound. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the 4 holes. I don't know whether I was just looking in the wrong place. The whole frontage depicts the history of the world as told in the Bible and shows Christ flanked by angels above statues of the disciples and kings, as well as martyrs and confessors. At each end are 2 elaborately decorated towers. The original central tower was damaged by an earthquake in the 13th century. The rebuilding took some 60 years to complete, but after just 20 years, cracks began to appear. And so in order to save the tower from collapse, the master mason William Joy built the famous scissor arches. These can still be seen in the main part of the cathedral and the hidden buttresses in the upper part of the church building. These are the second most astonishing parts of the cathedral. Added as a means of strengthening the central tower, they were added between 1338 and 1348. But there is speculation that these beautifully crafted and created arches don't create as much additional support to the tower as was originally thought. However, the fact remains that 700 years later, no further support has been required to prevent further collapse. You may have noticed the undeniable beauty of these cathedrals. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 28 and 29, we read, "And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." Now, I wholeheartedly agree with this quotation, but I think this comes pretty close. To the north side of the choir is a door which gives access up to the chapter house, the roof of which is a stunningly beautiful array of ribbed stone vaulting. The stone steps lead up to the chapter house and beyond. To me, these steps are utterly beautiful to behold. But they are just steps. Get a grip, I hear you say. A photograph of these steps, which is the one on the right, together with photographs of the scissor arches, are possibly the 2 most significant reasons why Wells Cathedral is my number 1 favourite. I first saw this photograph when I was studying GCSE photography some years ago. I've tried to replicate the photograph and its mood many times, but I've never yet quite managed to capture something to replicate the original photograph. and that was taken by Frederick Evans. The steps continue up towards a door at the top, as you can see there through the arch, and that leads through to a corridor, which is that corridor there, and that corridor links with the cathedral to the Vicar's Close. And the Vicar's Close is a collection of terraced houses, which you can see on the top left. And these are accommodation used for the community of vicars at the cathedral. Not all cathedrals have these. The cathedral boasts some of the finest medieval stained glass to be found anywhere in England, which miraculously survived the Reformation and the Civil War. The Jesse or golden window, there we go. Where were we? Lost my place. Jesse or golden window dates back to 1340, and thanks to its height, avoided the stones of the mob. The window traces the ancestry of Christ through Mary to Jesse, the father of King David, in the shape of a genealogical tree. This is also on my favourite list. The Cathedral Church of the Holy and Undivided Trinity of Ely, colloquially known as Ship of the Fens. Bishop, or acting bishop, as far as I was able to gather, is the Right Reverend Dr. Dagmar Winter, the Dean, the Very Reverend Mark Bonney. A very beautiful, and some have said feminine, cathedral. That's a description not totally out of place, because a double monastery was established in Ely in the year 673 by a woman, Etheldreda. The double monastery being for both men and women. This church was all but destroyed by the Vikings around 869, but was refounded as a Benedictine monastery around 970. This time for men only. Sorry, girls. The present building came about following the invasion by William the Conqueror, and from the ruins of the old monastery was created the beginnings of the present-day cathedral, a project which took just over 100 years. Ely Cathedral is a large building when compared to the small town in which it is set. To one edge of the town centre, and with a close of grassed areas on all sides, this cathedral can be seen for miles and miles around. It's built on a slight hill within the surrounding fenlands of East Cambridgeshire. Now, for those who are familiar with the geography of this part of England, there are very few landmarks that could be regarded as hills. The cathedral is best known for its octagonal lantern and transept. And the lantern on top is formed entirely from timber and clad with lead externally. And it's the only one in England. There are 172 steps up to the lantern, broken up into 3 stages and involving at one part a walk along part of the roof on the north side. When I visited this cathedral as a student architect around about 1980, I was part of a small group who were tasked with measuring the lantern, including the sizes of all the supporting timber work, and once back at our School of Architecture in Leeds, our project was to try to replicate the lantern to scale, including an explanation as to how we believed it was originally built. This was not an easy task. There is speculation to this day that nobody knows for sure how carpenters actually built the lantern back in the mid-1300s. And if you'll see in a minute the size of timbers involved, and to say nothing of how it's remained in place for so many 100 years later. So that's where the octagonal transept is and the lantern above it. There we have the lantern. The vertical panels of the lantern are beautifully decorated with angels. Our tour guide was able to open up a couple of panels so that we could look down at the crossing, which you'll see bottom, second one in from the right. On Remembrance Day, showers of poppy petals pour down from the lantern panels. I was amused to see small areas around the edge of the lantern where poppy petals had not quite made the journey down. It was even more amusing when I realised that these petals must have been up there for about 9 months. So you may be able to see on the bottom row, the second one in, there's a slight amount of red at the bottom. Those are poppy petals which have been poured out and they've just stayed there. You may notice the west front is not symmetrical. This is because the northwest tower collapsed in 1392 and nobody has ever been able to replace it. The simplicity of the nave accentuates the length together with being able to see through the rood screen into the choir. The nave roof is one of the most beautiful in England and was painted by 2 artists with the rather wonderful names of Henry Stileman Lestrange, and after his untimely death by his friend Thomas Gambier Parry. Ely also boasts some of the best Victorian stained glass anywhere. The colours are so vibrant and yet have a softness to them. The photo on the top right, that's the one, depicts Etheldreda as being involved in the planning and design of the stained glass windows. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. The cathedral is reputed to have the largest lady chapel in the UK, possibly the world. It's a magnificently glorious, that's the one right at the top in the top right-hand corner. It's a magnificently decorated space. And very, very light because there are no stained glass windows, it's all clear glass. The Lady Chapel is home to a controversial statue of the Virgin Mary, designed by David Wynne. It was placed above the new altar table at the East End and unveiled by the then Prince of Wales in 2000. The statue caused controversy at the time, depicting the Virgin Mary in a very ecstatic pose, like some sort of love goddess. A more generous observation is that the pose represents a young woman embracing the task to be the mother of Jesus. I'll leave you to form your own opinion. The latest period of major restoration was begun in 1986 and completed in the mid-90s at a cost of a mere £12 million. It was here that Pixie Lott married her husband Oliver Cheshire in 2022, oddly enough, the same year Sue and I visited. We have nothing at all to do with the wedding, of course. Films shot in and around Ely Cathedral include Elizabeth the Golden Age, The Crown, Macbeth, and The King's Speech. And parts of the cathedral can also be seen in some of the Harry Potter film franchise. My journey ended on the 25th of October 2024. It's been both an inspiration and an education. I felt blessed and honoured to be around and inside these special places. There have been moments of deep peace, times of serenity, feelings of hope, humour, surprise and wonder. From the beginnings of Christianity in this country, through disaster, war, turmoil, joy and ceremony, our cathedrals stand as a close and certain beacon, a strong and certain beacon of hope into the future. I've whittled on for long enough, and so it's time to draw things to a close. I hope I've given you all food for thought and left you wanting to see more or do more and go to see all of these wonderful buildings. Cathedrals are no different from people. They have a beginning, they grow and develop, change and adapt, have good times and bad times, argue and fight, and then make up. What is special to me may be different to your relationship with the cathedral. That's okay. In fact, it's better than okay. I'd say it's essential. The important thing is to recognise and celebrate our differences, embrace them. Because without differences, we'd all be the same. And who wants that? Thank you for listening.
Is it still on, Naomi?
Yes.
Yeah. On behalf of Life Group, we'd like to thank Steve very much for this presentation, and of course Sue as his ever able assistant. And it's been so enlightening, and I think different parts of your talk has resonated with each one of us, and it's so wonderful, the clarity of the photographs and everything. But we totally get the ethos behind the whole project, and celebrate and give thanks that you've had such pleasure and inspiration from this journey. So much more than some people's bucket lists seem very trivial in comparison. So on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you so much again, once again, Steve, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You haven't seen my bucket list.